Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time you're watching this, I hope everything's going well. As the subtitle says, this is a lot of random stuff that I hope connects. What I'm intending with the subtitle is to remind you of character, conflict, connection, and theme. I believe I've spent some time on character. What kind of people are we dealing with? I hope I've talked a little bit about the conflicts inherent with both Maggie in Trail of Lightning and Walt in The Cold Dish. We're going to get to theme and why that's an important part of the analysis. I haven't talked much about connections. So this presentation might be frightening. It's going to take you inside my brain, and I really can't think of a more frightening place. But I want to talk about a few of the connections that have come to mind for me, and I hope for you. Some of the questions you see on this presentation will be things that we discuss in class that I hope I can get students to talk about, but we're going to try to concentrate on connections, personal connections, connections to other media, connections to other things in class. The first thing I want to talk about is to go back to the cold dish. You did an assignment on whether Roanhorse was guilty of cultural appropriation. She was not Navajo. She wrote about Navajo culture and Navajo practices. I don't think that Craig Johnson is Native American, and yet he is writing about Native American spirituality, Native American practices, the feather as a Native American talisman, how it symbolizes life, boldness, and freedom of unity, how it is a sign of life, how the owl feather is a sign of death. By talking about this, is he guilty of appropriation because he's putting it in a book for the express purpose of making money? Or is he being respectful? Is he making us think about other cultures doing things differently than the dominant culture in the United States does things? Is he alerting us to different ways of thinking, different ways of seeing, and just letting us know that that is out there? And for those of us in South Dakota, remembering that people on the reservations who may be our neighbors come from a little bit of a different tradition than we do. I think that that's entirely possible and entirely something we might want to think about. There are some personal connections. If you look at this quotation, I think one of the things that we can look at is the idea of community. I know why he owned the bar, why he had gravitated to it. It was a sense of community. In a way, it was why we both did what we did. It was a way of looking after things, making sure everything was all right. First question that hit me is, what does community mean? In class, the question is going to be, what does community mean to you? Second question that hit me, we live in the year of our Lord 2023, and there are tons of people who talk about the online community is as real to them or more real to them than the personal community. They have more connections online than they do with the people that they're living with face to face. And the third one was the line about looking after things, making sure everything was all right. The question that prompted for me was, does everyone have a responsibility to community and to look after things and make sure everything is all right? During the pandemic, I think Sioux Falls newspaper, I believe the Rapid City newspaper, both had articles about people who came to South Dakota because South Dakota didn't have a statewide mask mandate. Whatever the opinion about masks, that's immaterial to this thing. The statements that resonated with me, or that resonated with me and made me think about this quotation, was the folks saying, I don't have a responsibility to anyone else. I only have a responsibility to me. I thought then, this quotation made me think of it again. How many people does it take to have a community? And let me rephrase it. How many responsible people does it take to have a community? How many people does it take to look after things and make sure everything is all right? And if no one looks after things, if everyone only looks out for themselves, is it possible to make sure everything is all right? I think those were connections with that statement. I told people at the start of class, I picked books I like. I didn't think that they were necessarily great books. That said, if books make us question things like community and the necessity of us being in a community, then I think that they're very important. I sometimes forget how spiritual Henry was. I had been raised as a Methodist, where the highest sacrament was the bake sale. First time I read that, I thought about Garrison Keillor, whose Prairie Home Companion and book Lake Wobegon talked about Methodists and Lutherans and Unitarians and how living together in Minnesota, that was just a chunk of their existence. And he made jokes at the expense of all of them. On the Methodist side, allegedly, these all come from Garrison Keillor. Methodists drink coffee as if it were a third sacrament. So apparently the highest sacrament's the bake sale, but coffee's important. Methodists serve Jell-O in the proper liturgical color and think peas in a tuna casserole adds too much color. I grew up in a non-liturgical denomination, but at potlucks or at funerals where casseroles were part of the dinner after the service, the idea of too much color in the casserole, somehow that strikes home. So does the idea of always having coffee available. And again, the highest sacrament might be the bake sale, but certainly coffee seems to be a big deal here. Donuts are a line item in the church budget, just like coffee. I'm going to just say that donuts should be a line item in every budget. As a non-liturgical person, this joke doesn't quite work, but going to Mass with my wife sometimes, I certainly think about this. May the force be with you and also with you, or with your spirit, either one. It takes 10 minutes to say goodbye. I think that's true through the Dakotas, through Minnesota. It always takes 10 minutes to say goodbye. And here's my source. Remember to cite your sources better than I do. Connection to obscure stuff. Terroir. The particular environment in which grapes for a wine were grown, which give the wine a special character. I'm not much of a wine drinker, but other groups have started to take this term terroir and to apply it to the idea of how does the environment shape whatever is growing there, whatever is produced there. And I'm going to apply it to how does the environment of Wyoming imbue, fill something with a particular feeling, quality, or idea. Does the natural environment of Wyoming imbue the cold dish? Do we get an idea of that environment, and is that a central part of this novel and of the characters in the novel? The social environment of 21st century Wyoming, especially smaller towns, does that fill the cold dish? And does that make it part of it? Does the environment, whether it's natural or social, affect the novel and make it more real, fill it with a particular feeling, idea, give it a special character? I think that that's really important. And I think then you need to connect one more time to yourself. How much of the natural and social environment of where you grew up affects who you are? I think that the natural environment and the social environment of Wyoming, as I understand them, kind of are there in the cold dish, kind of represent the cold dish, are another character of the cold dish. It's not just Walton, Vic, and Henry. I think Wyoming and the town are part of the character, are another character. How much of it does it affect you? And again, I hope we spend some time discussing this in class. A transition, stereotypes versus archetypes. A stereotype is a fixed general image, usually negative, that talk about a particular type of person or thing. An archetype is a symbol, pattern, or character type in a story. It's any story element that appears again and again in stories from cultures around the world and symbolizes something universal in the human experience. Let me give you what I think is a great example. We tend to think of the cowboy as a uniquely American thing. They travel from place to place in search to work. If they're employed, they work for a rich landowner. They're skilled with tools and weapons. The horse is the key to their identity. They act on a personal code of behavior. They often fight alone for those who can't. They're often stoic. It's always yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, very few words. And the cowboy rarely gets the girl. If you look at the knight, they often traveled from place to place as part of their quest. If employed, they worked for the rich lord. They were skilled with their tools and weapons. The knight on the white charger charging into battle was key to their identity. The chivalric code was a key element of who they were. They fought alone for the good of those who can't. They too accepted their fate stoically. And they're rarely with the maiden they worship from afar. They didn't even get a kiss. They were lucky if they picked up a handkerchief she dropped. And this connection between archetype and avoiding the stereotypes, because I do think it's important for people like Johnson to avoid small town stereotypes. Lead me to some connections. How are Walt and Maggie similar? Is Maggie a cowboy / knight? She certainly talks about her weapons. She winds up fighting for those who can't. She acts on her own personal code. And let's talk about the sporting characters. We have the bar owner Grace. We have Henry, the bar owner. How similar are they besides being bar owners? The point I'm trying to make here is think about making connections. Try to connect to other media. Try to connect to your personal life. Try to connect to other books we've read in class. All in all, I think it's important to work on making these connections. I'm going to wrap it up here. I hope everyone has a good day, and I hope to see you in the next class period.